If you would like to earn CPE credit for listening to the show, visit earmarkcpe.com/FPA. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Finally, if you enjoy listening to FP&A today, please go to your podcast platform of choice, click the subscribe button, and leave a rating and review of the show. And now, on to the show.
From data rails, this is FP&A Today.
Welcome to FP&A Today. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Greg Lopez to our show. Greg is a seasoned financial leader with an impressive track record of driving growth and profitability across a diverse range of industries. Currently, Greg works as a CFO and consultant at Aventus Advisory Group, leveraging his expertise to help private equity firms, venture capital investors, founders, and CEOs make data-driven financial and operational decisions. His clients span across media, e-commerce, professional services, consumer goods, fintech, and software. Prior to his consulting role, Greg served as the CFO and VP of operations at Futurism, a digital media company that covers breakthrough science and technology. During his tenure, Greg played a pivotal role in launching Gravity Products, a sleep wellness e-commerce brand that quickly grew to generate over $25 million in annual revenue. Under his financial leadership, both Futurism and Gravity Products were successfully acquired. Greg's career also includes his roles as VP of Finance and Operations at Wirecutter, which was acquired by the New York Times, and Head of Finance at Gawker Media, which was acquired by Univision. With his deep understanding of financial strategies, operational optimization, and data-driven decision-making, Greg has consistently delivered results and navigated complex challenges throughout his career. In this episode, we'll dive into Greg's wealth of experience, exploring his insights on scaling businesses, driving profitability, managing risk, and adapting to the ever-changing landscape of media, e-commerce, and beyond. So let's welcome Greg Lopez to the show and learn from his invaluable perspective on financial leadership in today's dynamic business world. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Glenn. Excited to be on.
We got a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and dive in. Looking at your background and career, and you've worked in several industries. You've worked in media, e-commerce, and finance. Looking at your roles, I was wondering what initially drew you to the world of finance, and how has that experience shaped your approach to financial leadership?
Yeah, great question. So for me, I believe that finance fits my personality. So growing up, I was always someone who was very logical, rational, and tended to be pretty risk averse. So when the opportunity arose in college to pick a career trajectory, a career path, I knew I wanted to go into business. And specifically within business, I studied accounting and business administration. And I thought that was a great foundation for me. And I really thrived during my studies at school. And when I got out of school, it was basically the recovery. It was 2009 from the great financial crisis. So there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities. But I was lucky enough to find a role at a public company that just spun out of ADP. It's called Broadridge. And at the time, they were about a $2 billion company. And today, I think it's about over $10 billion market cap. And for me, it was a great opportunity as my first role out of school because I was able to work in an environment that had a corporate foundation being part of ADP prior, but also was trying to carve its own path, being a new publicly listed company. So the environment was incredibly collaborative. Everyone was incredibly supportive to kind of pave Broadridge's own way. And Broadridge is a fintech company that powers a lot of the back end of trade settlements and mutual fund. My first role there was in the finance department. And over the 2-year tenure I had with Broadridge, I got to essentially do rotations in a variety of different departments. So I was able to work in treasury. I was able to work in corporate development. I was able to work in FP&A. I was able to work in credit and collections. And then most importantly, I was able to work in operations and be down on the warehouse floor with the team and the operations. One of the things that they did was at the time, if you buy a mutual fund, you would get a prospectus in the mail. Today, a lot of it's digital and they've kind of made that shift to digital. But at the time, you were getting a paper prospectus that would have all the information about the fund you were buying or the fund you were considering. Same thing with annual reports. That was one piece of their business in regards to many others. But sitting on on the warehouse floor with the team, understanding the operations, how everything moves throughout the company. And, this is one segment of the business, but there's a whole bunch of other segments of the business as well. It's just really great learning experience, and spending time with business operations is key. That's kind of my background of how I got started in finance. Second part of your question of how my experience throughout my career has shaped my approach to financial leadership. So the foundation at Broadridge, like I just said, spending time with the business operations is key. And that's something that I still feel really strongly with today. One of the things I like to say to folks is, especially my clients, is the financial statements, they're not reality. They reflect reality. The reality is the operations of your business, right? And that's sales, marketing, operations, technology team. And my belief is that finance should really act as an investigative journalist for the business. And in that role, you're discovering the relationship between variables at the business and uncovering what makes the business tick beyond just the financial statements. And our job as finance leaders is to keep stakeholders informed across the business, across different departments with the latest data and guidance.
I love to hear you say that because that is, I think about, maybe 20 years ago as CFO, you could just kind of be in this ivory tower of finance and accounting, and it didn't matter what the widget the company was selling. You were just doing the financial statements. You were just, get that trial balance, get the financial statements out and do the reporting and have your annual budget. Just operate from the place of, I'm the subject matter expert on finance and accounting. And I think that that's really shifted over the last 20 years. And I'm seeing now, so when I come in, whether I'm as a consultant or as a full-time CFO, when I come into a company, the first thing I want to do is look at, I think of it like an audit of the entire back office process. I want to see everything from the CRM, your sales pipeline, your leads, your prospects, when deals are won, how data is passed from the CRM into the GL or the project management system or whatever other software is, and look at that flow of it's the customer life cycle, but it's also the flow of data across, because all the data that you have is going to be imperative to your reporting and your metrics and your forecasting and all that. So if you don't understand where the data is coming from, you don't have the identified source of truth, and you don't know how you're defining the metrics and understand really what's coming in. So would you say that you're getting down into operations? If you kind of seen the same thing, do you take the same approach when you come on with a new client or a new company?
Yeah, for sure. We'll talk about later. I have kind of a concept of having a commercial mindset as a CFO. That is going to be what excels you and makes you stand out against leaders. And having that commercial mindset gives you the framework to be that partner and that trusted advisor to other stakeholders of the business, whether it's the board, whether it's the CEO, or whether it's other department leads or your peers.
It's interesting that you had those opportunities being at a large company, because normally you think it's, big enterprise level or mid-market company. You are really kind of forced to stay in your lane just because of the size and redundancy. Whereas in startups, it's very different. You have to wear a lot of hats. So I'm thinking about you getting those opportunities in a larger company and then being able to take it and apply it to smaller companies. So thinking about those corporate experiences, what did you take away from your experience there that definitely applies to smaller companies as well?
Yeah. So the one thing I'll say that big companies typically do well is they create a great job at creating structure and process. Because at the end of the day, your business is just a bunch of smaller processes that need to be repeatable and need to be similar in how they're done. You could take the best examples of those and apply them to a smaller business. But in a smaller business, you can keep the creativity and innovation. A great example is first impressions matter, in my opinion. And that could be whether you're fundraising or you're selling to customers or launching new products or even just your website. It's usually the first touch point that someone gets familiar with your business. I'll remember always when I received my internship offer from PricewaterhouseCoopers, it was like they rolled out the red carpet. It was so impressive. I had a folder. I had, day one, everything was laid out perfectly. Everything was structured. There was an agenda. It wasn't just, hey, you're here. No one knows who you are. Get an ID tag, go to some random floor, try and find someone who's your manager, ask around. everything was really done well. And that always stuck with me. And those are small things. So when you're onboarding employees at your company, make it special, make it feel like it's serious and that you are appreciative that they chose to work with you and that they are lucky to have the opportunity to work for you. And that's a small thing, but that is a output of clearly defined structure and process that was repeated because big four firms they bring on, I don't know, thousands if not hundreds of thousands of interns and new associates annually. So they've got that down, and that really makes you feel a certain type of way.
Thinking about that for a startup environment where you're inventing processes as you go. So you mentioned onboarding, but I imagine, there's no back office process. Like even provisioning customers has to be like, depending on what stage you are in startup, very difficult. So I guess kind of a follow-up to thinking about processes. I think a lot of times when people keep getting drawn back to the startup world from corporate, it's a company reaches a size where it can be too rigid. Do you think is there a level of flexibility? Like you want to keep that startup mentality, but you've got to start, if you're going to scale, you've got to start putting those processes in place. How do you define that line between we have to have processes and we don't want to be too rigid because we have to be able to pivot while we're finding product market fit, while we're building out the new company?
If you're in market and you're selling and you have customers, there will be signs. Now, pre-market or pre-revenue or pre-product, that's a completely different story. And I'm not advocating for building processes in that regard. But once you're in market, there will be signs, things like customers not getting the attention that they once were getting, or balls being dropped, or sales cycle velocity slowing down, or people, frankly, leaving the company, right? Because there's just not enough there to keep the ball moving forward in a way that everyone feels confident. So there will be some signs as you continue down the path of scale. But yeah, early stage, your superpower is the ability to be flexible and adaptable and to pivot, frankly. So I'm not advocating for rigid processes at that stage, outside of maybe a couple in finance that are, I think are non-negotiable. And we could talk about that later.
Yeah, controls are nice, right?
Exactly.
Your background, and when you talk, you've been doing consulting and fractional CFO work for a while, and you've worked with businesses in all stages. I know you've done a significant amount of startup work too, but thinking about just you work with so many types of clients across so many industries. So you probably, I'm guessing in that regardless of the industry, you're seeing some similar challenges for each. What would you say are some of the most common financial and I guess even operational challenges that your clients face, and how do you help them overcome these from your role as a fractional CFO and a consultant to the company?
Yeah. So I see a lot because I work with a variety of different businesses across different stages of growth. So I work with uh, the family-owned business doing $20 million. I work with the SaaS business doing $10 million a year. I work with the private equity-backed business doing $500 million a year. So it really runs the gamut in terms of the experiences and what I see. But there are, especially on the earlier stage side, pretty common items that I continuously see. I'll start with one I think is the most important. Define your metrics, and I say define in all caps. There's a tendency to change your metrics or change how you calculate them when it doesn't fit the narrative. But the first exercise I like to do when we're talking about metrics is literally define them. Understand your data mapping. What is the source data? What's the numerator? What's the denominator? How are we calculating this? Got to get buy-in from your peers and your counterparts on how the data is reported, ingested, and interpreted. And that really rolls into developing your company's operating system. It can happen at all stages, but it's very common in early stage, and that's a problem that can easily be fixed once you get everyone in a room that's a stakeholder for those metrics. And finance should lead that conversation and act as the referee to a certain extent, but also listen and understand some of the challenges that might come up from the from listening to the feedback from maybe the sales team and the marketing team on why that might not be or maybe the right way to do things.
Across industries, there's commonalities, and there's probably, I think, also because of the different stages where you've worked at companies, from those pre-revenue to established businesses. How do you see that the financial priorities and the challenges differ between each of those stages? And what advice would you give to the founders and maybe a new CFO, or in the case of a startup, a CFO at a later stage company? What advice would you have for them for navigating each of those phases?
Early stage, I'll be real with you, right? If you're pre-revenue, you don't really need a CFO. You need someone keeping track of a couple of high-level metrics like burn, headcount, and you need a good firm that's bookkeeping and keeping a QuickBooks file for you if you use QuickBooks or Xero or whatever, something basic, not a spreadsheet, right? And at a certain point, you have to, as a founder, embrace that finance is beyond just backwards looking and record keeping. And I think that is a sometimes a tough mind shift, because you're so used to your accountant giving you or your bookkeeper giving you financial statements 20 days after the month's over, and there's really not that much activity, so you don't really put a lot of value there. But as the business grows, it becomes incredibly important to keep accurate books and records and have a strategic finance partner that helps you look around the corner and helps really steer your ship and provide guidance. What I would say, the way you get that buy-in from a founder or from your peers, or if you're joining a new company, is you really, and I talked about this before, you really got to embrace a commercial mindset. And what that means to me is understand that in most businesses, the sales team and the business development team, or whatever you want to call it, whoever's driving revenue, they set the pace for the business. So you need to partner with them, understand the sales velocity of their sales cycle. It could be marketing in an e-commerce firm. It could be the sales team in a B2B firm. Whoever's driving revenue, that is an ally, and you need to work with them and enable that growth mindset, that commercial mindset, and be that valuable partner to them. And that can be performing ad hoc analysis. That could be, like I said before, helping them define metrics and keeping them accountable to those metrics, explaining to them how if we hit a sales target, if we miss a sales target, if we exceed a sales target, what does that mean for us as a business? What does that unlock? Is that if we exceed a target by 20%, does that give us more capital to potentially invest in the next product or make additional hires to accelerate product development? If we miss the target, does that put us in jeopardy of raising our next round of funding and devolve into a downward spiral of layoffs? Being a clear communicator and partnering with the business team is a piece of advice that I think is essential for the modern CFO, or whatever we want to call it. And it kind of gets you out of that analogy that you mentioned before of like the CFO who's kind of separated from everyone in an ivory tower, just preparing financial statements and talking numbers.
FP&A Today is brought to you by DataRails, the world's #1 FP&A solution. DataRails is the artificial intelligence-powered financial planning and analysis platform built for Excel users. That's right, you can stay in Excel. But instead of facing hell for every budget, month-end close, or forecast, you can enjoy a paradise of data consolidation, advanced visualization, reporting, and AI capabilities. Plus game-changing insights giving you instant answers and your story created in seconds. Find out why more than 1,000 finance teams use DataRails to uncover their company's real story. Don't replace Excel, embrace Excel. Learn more at datarails.com. I'm thinking about that difference in the mindset that you have to have in that startup early stage business versus an established business where you have all the processes and everything, and the kinds of things you're looking at are very different when you're looking at your cash flow in a going concern versus the burn rate in a startup. So coming in, if someone is making that shift as you did from a bigger company to a startup, from a financial perspective, we've talked about process and kind of across the company, but really digging in, on the finance perspective, what is the kind of mindset and what advice would you have for someone coming into that position?
So another common trope is when you're joining a startup, obviously you have constraints and you need to understand them. And the most typical constraint is just cash and your access to cash. But it could also be talent acquisition, ability to hire and retain talent. It could be your product distribution. It could be your brand recognition. So really understanding what those constraints are and how that affects, the plans for growth and the plans for the future. Building a business in general just takes time, and it's rare that there's an instant gratification or instantaneous feedback. Especially early stage, you have to do what you can to increase that feedback loop or the speed of feedback, whether that's shipping new product or reaching out to customers or getting out in the market. All of those things will help you accelerate the odds and chances that you're going to find product market fit and be able to scale revenue. One of the other things I see is once you bring in a finance leader and you understand that there's potentially constraints like cash, there's now this expectation to start tracking every single dollar. And yes, we want to be fiduciary for the business and we want to be mindful of how much we're spending. But no, we don't have to have a meeting with 6 leaders at the company to talk about a $500 vendor that we want to bring on. I see that happen a lot. And I think we need to, again, going back to that commercial mindset, it might feel comfortable to be like, yes, we need to be really rigid about what we're spending. But also when we have 5 people in a room who are making 6 figures, talking about bringing on a $500 or $1,000 expense for an hour, we just spent more money in wages talking about that specific vendor than if we just made the decision to move forward. So I would also offer the advice of, trust other department heads, your peers essentially, to make, small ticket decisions. Obviously, if anything is going to materially impact your burn rate, that should be a bigger discussion. But if we want to swipe a credit card for $100 to get a new license for some tool that might make, prospecting easier, I'm always like, go for it. I trust that you're going to make the right choice here. And then as the CFO coming into early stage company or a company that just entered the market, we really need to understand the market and the customer profile. And that's where, again, going back to that commercial mindset, spending time with sales, understanding the voice of the customer, selling solutions, not necessarily the features of your product, right? All of those things are really helpful as a financial leader when you're talking and trying to build that bridge and partnership with your sales team or your marketing team to get the trust so that you're getting accurate pipeline reports or accurate forecasting and able to ask the tough questions without coming across accusatory or blaming or just taking whatever they're telling you at face value. And then a couple other things that you really need to hone in on, in my opinion, is there's a common one for startups, and sometimes it works out, and a lot of times it doesn't. Don't mistake unsustainable underpricing for product market fit. We all love a deal as a consumer. B2B even better. If we're getting a deal that we feel like is underpriced and there's so much value being extracted, but in reality, whoever's offering us that service or that product is using venture capital or just underpricing to gain market share, is going to have a big issue when they have to create a viable business model. So you need to understand on the flip side, is that your business, right? Is revenue growing because you have an unsustainable pricing model? And then how do we address that and get ahead of it? And it's not a bad strategy. We just have to have a plan for when we need to flip the switch to becoming viable, that we don't lose our entire customer base or we don't piss off everybody so bad that they start writing LinkedIn rants. So
Right.
as a CFO, that's kind of our job to figure that out and keep everyone aware of that. And then really understanding from a financial perspective, cash flow and how much cash is needed to achieve the next milestone, especially when you're out raising. Investors like to invest in companies that have a plan. They don't like to invest. Maybe some do, but my opinion, most don't like to invest in companies that give you a range of fundraising. Oh, we're looking to raise 5 to 10 million to do kind of these things. It's like, no, tell me exactly what the plan is. I want to raise 5 million. And if I do, I'm going to hire these people, and those people are going to work on this product, and we're going to launch it on this date, right? That just gives you, even if it's not entirely or very aggressive in terms of the plan, not entirely true or really aggressive, it just gives that confidence. It goes back to my point of, it's like a first impression. It matters when you come to the table with an investor and you're asking them to invest in you. You need to lay out exactly what the plan is. You can't be wishy-washy.
Hearing you talk about that, I'm kind of thinking about war stories from my own past and startups, and I'm thinking about in those early stages where everybody's wearing a lot of hats, and I'm thinking about sales and marketing has their plan and kind of what their forecast that they're doing on their own. I think typical sales leaders have an idea of what they think is going to happen, and then there's the financial model, and everyone has their inputs, and the operational costs and everything. Is it difficult in that early stage for the finance leader to make it? I'm thinking about those conversations where, sort of the blue sky startup model where everybody's going to have the hockey stick exponential growth. I mean, how hard is it to get sort of that cooperation and buy-in among, what the founder, CEO, what his vision is or her vision is, and what the salesperson's vision is, and finance and all that? When you're coming up with that model, is there potential conflict between what sales thinks is going to happen, when finance is going to happen, and if so, how do you smooth that over?
Yeah, we've all done the business model where in 5 years we're now working at $1 billion unicorn, and we close the file, go to bed, and kind of just sit there rolling our eyes. Like that's actually not going to happen. But that's natural as a finance leader. Our job is to balance risk and growth. If we can grow that fast and we know where our next fundraising is coming from and we have infinite line of capital to draw on, yeah, possibly. But the reality is there are constraints, and when we have to make decisions on can we afford this hire or can we afford to invest into this new product, again, cash is the constraint. So you have to know what those milestones are to unlock that next round of financing. You have to know what the plan is and what the trigger points are. And you got to clearly communicate that. In early stage business, we're going to wear a lot of different hats as the finance leader. And one of the most important things is to really ensure that there's a support system and the other leaders are aligned with you. And if there's not a culture of being data driven or being realistic, or if the culture is always just, always optimistic all the time, always rah rah, it definitely can wear on you. And there is a balance, right? I'm someone who, again, likes to have that commercial mindset to a point, right? But my job as the finance leader is to make sure that the business sees tomorrow and that the business lives to see another day. And it's my responsibility to, articulate that to my peers and raise my hand when I feel that we're not going in that direction or I need cooperation. That would be my piece on that.
And hearing you say data driven, that brings up another great point. I think about, as FP&A people and financial modelers and the kind of work that we love to do, we love to make these models data driven and not just based on, in startup, it's easy to start just like stacking one assumption on another. And that's how you get to the hockey stick of exponential growth. So, I mean, I know your background in data-driven decision-making is a core part of your approach. And I'm thinking, I guess I want to think about this in two ways. One, if you've got an example of how you've used data at a company before to drive significant improvements in their financial or operational performance, but then also thinking about how much of your time you've spent in the startup space where you just don't have a lot of data. What advice would you have for companies who are still in that early stage and don't have a lot of data yet?
I'm going to be honest, right? Entering an environment that does not have a data first culture is difficult. It's hard to be really successful, but it's also our job to usher in that change management of the firm. There is kind of like this misconception, I feel, especially as a consultant, of what data is. And I imagine many of the listeners, myself included, have been in a position where we're expected to just be mind readers or know the insights about a business. So that customer doesn't belong to that seller. Well, why is that not in Salesforce? Why is that not in Pipedrive that way, right? You might know it as the CEO, but you haven't kind of removed that from your brain and created some kind of process to capture it, um, which is, further to my point that actionable data, it's a byproduct of routine processes, right? And it needs to be enforced by the culture from the top down. And if we are working in an environment that doesn't really value doing things in a routine process, a pipeline CRM is a perfect example of that. If you have a bunch of different sellers doing things their own way, some folks not putting it in till, not putting in their data until the end of the week, some people putting it in real time, someone who is thinking that they're at 90% close when it's really 50% close because they're just more optimistic than the other seller who might be underweighting their pipeline, right? Our job as finance is to come in and be like, hey, I'm not getting what I need here. I don't think this is being done sufficiently. Let's set up a process. The only way you're going to be successful there is if you get the buy-in from the team. And it's not always easy, but it needs to be emphasized how important it is to get good data on key areas of the business.
When you come in, it's, if the company was kind of scattered, not a lot of process, they know maybe they're at their A round, and they realize, okay, now we have to have true financial leadership. And you come in and you're tasked with gathering up all this data and getting this information from different systems. It feels like sometimes there's an expectation that this CFO, incoming head of finance, just has this understanding of where and how to get data. And like, it's almost like an expectation that you have development, IT skills, know how to hook up APIs and build a data lake and data warehouse. I mean, when you come in with that, what is something that as finance people that we need to keep in mind and to level set expectations and really the team around us to move them to a data-driven culture where it can't just be finance because, trying to write SQL queries and pull this out. I mean, what's the ideal setup when you come in and you are trying to establish this data-driven background? What do you need to do it? Who needs to be involved?
Yeah, it goes back to my previous comment. It's kind of like we feel like as finance professionals, we have to pick up the pieces, right? Sales booked that deal and didn't tell anybody, and we want to know why we didn't invoice it. Well, wasn't in the CRM. We didn't get a notification. We didn't get a heads up that this deal was closed. We never got a copy of the contract, right? And it's again, it's raising your hand and laying it out and saying, hey, this is a team sport. This is a team effort. And explain how person A not doing their job in sales, marketing, operations trickles down into finance, which then trickles down into inaccurate financial statements, which then trickles down into lack of confidence in the finance department. But it's kind of like advocating for your own career. If you don't say anything, everyone's just going to assume you're fine. So you have to be an advocate for yourself in the finance department. And again, I'm going to go back to it again, but having that commercial mindset gives you that credibility. You've already built the bridge. You've partnered with those teams for when you're asking them, hey, you guys really got to get this in. They feel like they're letting you down rather than feeling like, oh, here's Greg again asking me to get my expenses in, or here's Greg again asking me to weight my pipeline properly. I'll do it when I want to. It's like that doesn't really fly, but you have to have the accountability. So as finance leaders, we have to hold everyone to account. But the reality is we can't be accountable for everything. We don't manage the pipeline. We just don't. We don't know what you spent on your credit cards. You do. And that has to, again, come from the top down as a business leader or as a CFO or a CEO or founder.
Yeah, and I think about all this data, and of course, the data leads to FP&A people's next favorite words in terms of metrics and KPIs. And you have to track, identify, label the data that you have so that you can build these metrics and KPIs. Thinking about all the industries you've been in and what you've seen, are there some KPIs kind of across the board that you would say that companies should focus on to drive growth and profitability? And if they're not this, how do they vary across industries as well, I guess?
If you're selling physical goods, consumer goods or B2B or whatever, if it's a physical good, I'm a big proponent of looking at the contribution margin and the contribution profit for those items and really honing in on what your margins are. It's really hard to remove costs from physical products. And everyone who's worked in e-commerce built a model 5 years ago that said once they hit some scale, magically, your fulfillment costs are going to go down, your cost of goods sold are going to go down, your shipping costs out are going to go down, your shipping costs in are going to go down. And the reality is, all that stuff has gotten more expensive, and you don't have the amount of levers you thought you potentially had. So if you misprice your product, it can come back to haunt you. So going back to the theme prior, don't mistake underpricing or insane value for product market fit, because it's going to create a situation where you have to make a choice that do we become a viable business, or can we continue to fundraise or figure out financing to keep the unviable business going, which it could be a strategy. I mean, look at like someone like Uber, right? they got such a big market share. We all love paying $5-10 for a taxi ride. Now it's $25 to $50. And I personally don't use it as much as I once did, but maybe some people are still, just in the habit and just like whatever. And clearly, something like that's worked for them, but it takes many years, and you got to get to a certain level of scale, and not all companies will get to that point. So the more realistic reality is that they just won't be able to close their next round of financing, and unfortunately have to either change their business model so drastically that they churn customers, or something else. And then for B2B software businesses, sales cycle velocity is a huge metric to track. And what that is essentially just how fast from open to close we get on a sale, and then figuring out where deals are getting stuck, and figuring out within that bottleneck, are there any threads that finance via an analytical mindset could partner with sales and figure out how can we speed things up to close more deals. And then the most important, just for any business, is customer feedback. And sometimes startups are a little hesitant to ask for feedback. They don't want to seem too needy or nascent, or they don't want to bother their customer because they have a good relationship and it's a paying customer. We don't want to bother them. But think about, Amazon. Every product you buy, they're asking for feedback. Was it good? Was your experience good? And I think going back to the ethos that Jeff Bezos has put in Amazon, like they're customer first, and they've kind of built their business on the backs of customer feedback and pleasing the customer. So I don't think anyone's going to look at you strangely if you're asking for feedback, or hey, if we build this feature, would you use it? Or I personally do surveys all the time for when companies ask to do surveys, and if they pay me, even better. And then the final piece, and just tracking these metrics, we got to define them. Like I said earlier, figure out what the source data and data mapping is. But when you're using those metrics and informing your financial model, I'm a big believer of not overcomplicating things. I like to keep my variables focused on 80-20, figure out exactly what's a driver here for the business. And then again, it goes back to my other point. It's like the financial statements, your models, they're a reflection of reality. You're not going to get bonus points because your forecast was like right on the money. You're not going to get a promotion because some really fancy Excel model. You're going to get a promotion. You're going to get noticed because you are someone who can partner with the business and business leaders, provide value, be a trusted advisor, provide some level of accurate forecasting, right? And do it in a manner that is timely and efficient.
Looking at the future, what do you think will be the biggest financial challenges that, I guess, financial and operational challenges that companies are going to face in the next 5 to 10 years? We have, on one end, we have fewer people coming into accounting. On the other end, right now, everybody's talking about AI, specifically generative AI, how it's going to change the workforce. How can companies and finance professionals, how can they prepare themselves to overcome these challenges?
I do think one of the bigger challenges that firms are going to face in the next couple of years is just retaining and developing talent, which leads into, as an individual, you should be staying on top of the latest tools and technology. And I know it's hard because we all have day jobs, but really playing around with these tools. And Glenn, I know you've done a ton of tinkering yourself. But reskilling and upskilling, these tools will level the playing field for most folks. So like I said before, knowing some fancy Excel formula, in probably 6 months from now, I'll be able to just in plain English explain what I want to do in an Excel model, and Copilot will be able to output the assumptions and output the formula for me. Alternatively, the threat of cyber attacks, the more digital businesses become, the more of a threat tools pose for cyber attacks or customer data breaches. As a finance person, making sure we have the right controls in place and the right insurance lines in place to protect ourselves and our firm, it's just a big risk that I would be focused on, especially for companies handling a lot of data, especially customer data.
Yeah, makes total sense. And and also with cyber attacks, when you have algorithms kicking out and kicking off more of these attacks, I think it is, it's that arms race between the security side and the hacker side. The need for security goes up proportional to the powers and abilities of those who are doing the cyber attacks. We're getting close to the end, so I'm going to go 3-question lightning round. We always try to get these in at the end of the show so we can get a little bit of the personal side of everyone. I guess first off, what is something that not many people know about you? Something that maybe they couldn't find by Googling you or looking you up on social media?
I'm a big junkie for pickup basketball. So I just moved from New York down to Atlanta, but in New York, whenever the sun was out and it was decent weather above 65, I was down at Brooklyn Bridge Park trying to get a pickup game in. And one of the first things I did down here, now that I moved to the Atlanta area, is find a couple courts where folks gather and get games going. And I think it's just interesting because it's kind of like it's kind of related to like going into a startup and trying to figure out how I can work with these people that I don't know and figure out what they're good at, what they're not good at, and how I can play off of them and partner with them. I think it's definitely helped me professionally kind of roll into a situation with strangers and then try and win a game against other strangers. And you have to be really perceptive about kind of all things that are going on the court.
That's great. That's great. And I love the idea of just, like you said, it's dropping into a new environment. You've got to figure out what's going on with people. You've got to establish trust. You've got to learn who you can trust there and who your go-to people are and who people maybe, maybe you don't need to make that pass to them because they're going to jack it up from 30 feet back. And
it's also knowing and having self-awareness of where you fit in, right? Do I have to take over, or am I not the best player right now to take the shot and maybe give it up for a better shot, right? I think that's important too, because in a business, sometimes you have to kind of take the ball and run with it yourself because you don't necessarily have that full trust, or you've given and handed off tasks prior and they haven't been done up to your standard, right? So it's like, it's just really interesting dynamic.
All right, this is the big one. If you've listened to FP&A today, you probably knew this was coming. What is your favorite Excel function?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually flip this one on you, and I think we should change the question to Excel function or feature, because for me, recently I've been doing a lot of scenario planning and modeling for my clients, and one of the features that I came across, which I didn't know about until recently, is this watch window. So you can just go into the search bar on the top and type in watch window, and ultimately what it does is you can select one cell or a handful of cells, and you can even make them named ranges. So for example, EBITDA, you can click your fiscal year EBITDA and then go onto another tab or change all your assumptions. And this watch window will change the EBITDA figure based on the assumptions. So rather than flicking back and forth or having multiple tabs open or multiple models open, you can kind of scenario plan on the fly, and you can do it with as many outputs as you'd like. So it's been really helpful, sitting with a CEO or sitting with a founder and saying, okay, well, here's what the baseline is. And then if we change a couple of things here and there, here's what it looks like. If we make a couple hires sooner than we thought, or we have a higher marketing cost or conversion cost or whatever, it's just really, really powerful.
See, and this is why we asked this question. I've been using Excel since, before the days of Clippy, and I was not familiar with the watch window, but now I'm excited to open up a model and geek out and watch that. I guess just the last question, for listeners of the show and anyone out there, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Probably LinkedIn, but I'm also on X, if we call it X now. You can find me at glopez tweets, or you can email me at glopez@aventusag.com.
Okay, well, Greg, I really appreciate your time, and we'll put that contact info in the show notes. And just great having you on today and getting your insights. And wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Glenn. Appreciate you having me.